Hello? Oh, okay. Well, I think we can start. Okay, so welcome everybody to this talk. We are going to talk about the Form API workflow. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Ricardo Sanz. I'm a Drupal developer and also DevOps. You can find me on Drupal.org with my username that it's Tunic, and also in Twitter. My name is Sanzante, at least until it's still up. And I work for Metadrop. We are a Drupal-focused company. We have worked with Drupal since Drupal 5, I think. So we do. We are used to complex sites, and this lets us to investigate a lot on the Drupal Form API, and that's the knowledge that I would like to share with you today. Let's see first the walkthrough of this talk. First, we are talking about what is the Form API. Then we'll see a simplified workflow of this of the Form API. Then we'll dive into the different Form API stages. And next, we'll see the cache and persistence mechanism, the AJAX requests, and then we'll see the complete workflow. And at the end of this talk, I would like to highlight the key points that you should keep from this talk. So let's start with the Form API. And what is the Form API? Well, the Form API is just an abstraction of the HTML form. It handles the submit, persistence, altering, and rendering of forms. It handles security. It handles the AJAX forms. It allows developers to alter the existing forms. It provides some safety, and it also allows developers to build their custom forms. And how is this done? Well, there is in Drupal, there is a form builder service. That it's a service that handles the forms. It involves many classes, but the most important ones are the form builder, the form validator, and the form base. Each form is implemented by a class that extends the form base at some point. Each form is composed by a form array, usually a $form variable in PHP, and a form state, usually a $form state variable in PHP. And what is the form array? It's a simple PHP array. Well, not simple because it could be very complex, but it's just a PHP array, no object-oriented code here. It holds the structure and the behavior of the form. It's not exactly a Drupal render array, although it's kind of similar, but it's not a render array. And this form, this variable should be available during all the Form API stages, and it can be changed during stages. The form state is usually a form state instance, or at least is a form state interface. It contains the state of the form, as you may know, inputs, error flags, etc. It's also available during all the form stage, all the Form API stages, and it can be also changed during stages. The values that you should know are the form ID. That's which form it is. It's, if you compare to the object-oriented programming, it's like the class, and the form build ID. That it's the specific form build, and it's like, also compared to object-oriented programming, it's like the instance, okay, of a given class. It's the instance of a certain type of form. And then we have the token that ensure that the form was previously requested by a user. This is related to security. So let's see the simplified Form API workflow. Let's say that the user requests a form. The workflow, let's say it's kind of simple. the form is, Drupal detects the form it's needed. So Drupal calls the form build function, call the alter hooks, and then the form is recursively built to render to get an HTML code that is returned to the user. This is a time diagram of what happens. The user requests, the Drupal does its magic, and then it's returned to the user. What happens when the user submits the form? It's kind of similar. Drupal detects the submission. So what it first does is Drupal is to build the form. This is because Drupal needs to check the user submitted values against the form to be sure that the values sent are the right ones and are related to the form that it's sent. In case once it's built, it's validated. If there are errors, the form is returned to the user with the errors, and if there are no errors, the submit handlers are executed. So the action that the form does, like creating a node or changing some configuration, is done at this point. This is a time diagram with the actions. So the user sends the form. Drupal does all the steps that I have said, and the return is delivered to the user. What happens when we have a rebuild form that it's rebuilt? It's more or less the same. Drupal generates or builds the form, validates the form. If there are errors, they are sent to the user. If not, the submit handlers can be executed. And if the rebuild action is enabled, then Drupal goes through the same previous stages of calling the build function, alter hooks, build all elements, and return the form that will have probably a different, new element, or removing some element, or doing something different, because at the end, that's the idea of the rebuild, that you get a form and you make some change and return it to the user. This is the diagram of the rebuilding loop. The user requests a page, Drupal delivers the page with a form, user submits the form for the first time, and then we enter on the rebuild loop that it should be that box with that, it should be yellow. I think you can't see very well, but I think that you can understand what is the rebuilding loop. And in that rebuilding loop, it's just a loop where the user sends the values, Drupal make any changes on the form, and then send it back to the to the user until the user pushes the final button, like the submit, for example, when you save a node or something like that, and then Drupal processes that final submission, and the final response is delivered to the user. This is a time diagram of this process. I'm not going to stop here because there is many information to say, and I'm a little bit short of time. What happens during the rebuilding? During the rebuilding, this is what, for example, can happen. You have one single item on a multi-valued field, and on each submit and rebuild, you add new elements. So that's the way we have dynamic forms in Drupal. About the form responses can be just markup. For example, when you finish the submission, you can send a message to the user. You can send a redirection. That's, for example, what happens when you create a node, that usually the user is redirected to the node page. You can send a rebuild form, as we have seen. Also, you can send a form with errors. And at the end, whatever the submit decide, you can return. Of course, if you do something very crazy, you will have problems. But The usual response are the first four. And it's that simple. Yes and no. Yes, because at the end the workflow is what we have seen, but it's not that simple because there are many details that I haven't said. For example, how the security is handled, how Drupal keeps track of the data between the requests, how the AJAX is handled, and the details on validation, submission, rebuilding, and workflow details. And that's what we are going to see now. And it's the part that this talk is, let's say, very dense. Okay, so be prepared. First is the retrieve and prepare. This is a stage that is divided in two sub stages. The first is the retrieve. Here is where the build function of the form is called. Here, all the elements or the initial elements are added to the form, and also the dynamic elements that usually depends on the form state. When we are on the rebuild loop, here is where the form is built again. And as I say, here you can, well, you are all the main elements, and you can decide if you have to add, for example, 1 or 2 or 3 elements when you are dealing with a multi-valued field, for example. And then we have the prepare stage or super stage, where the build ID is add, the security token is add, and the security token prevents the cross-site request forgery. This usually happens with registered users. So it's only added for registered users, for requests done by registered users. And here we have the alter hooks. Here is where there is the first opportunity to alter a form thanks to the different alter hooks. So if you are modifying a hook a form that is created by the code or any other contrib code, you can alter it here. This is the diagram of this part. As you see, when the form is requested, first you decide if it's on the cache or not. If it's not on the cache, it's to call the build form function. Well, in this case, you can return response in the build function, but this is usually in the special cases. And then the other values like build ID and the form tokens are added, and then we call the alteration hooks. What's the output of this stage? The output is a form that it's built. All dynamics and no dynamic elements are in place. All alterations have been done. And this is the unprocessed form in the sense that the input or the user input has not been processed yet. So that this is done on later stages. It's important to say that when we retrieve the cache, the form from the cache, this is what we get, the output of the retrieve and the prepare output usually. Then we have the recursive building. What's the goal? What are the goals of the recursive building? Well, get a renderable array. So we transfer the form array into a renderable array that can be rendered by the Drupal render system. Also, collect the input values from the user or the default values, because when we build the form for the first time, we need to put some values on some fields, and this is done here. Or when we rebuild the form and it's sent to the user, usually we have to keep the values that the user sent to Drupal. Here we detect also the triggering button, if any, and detect which validate handler to run in case if it's needed. Oops. And here we have the last chance to modify or tweak the form. Here we have the process callbacks and the after build callbacks. We'll see in the next slides. And here there are no standard alters. The alter phase is in the previous stage. This is the diagram. As you see, Mainly is a recursive function that's on that yellow box, that all the elements on the form are traversed and processed. And what are the process callbacks? The process callbacks, first of all, they are called top-bottom, so it means that they are the elements that are on the outside of the array or on the upper part are processed the first. It usually, one of the typical usage is to expand elements. For example, you have a date element. You can declare on the form API on the previous stages just one element with the date and all the configuration. But when you when you are going to render that element, you need more than one element, because, for example, you will need a text box for the month, for the year, and for the day. And the process callback is able to get one of the elements and expand it to 3 elements. For in this case, for month, month, year, and day. It's kind of common in Drupal core. There are like more than 100 uses. You may need it, especially if you are creating a custom element for the form API. And one other example is adding a JavaScript conditionally depending on the value of the field. That's something that you can do with the process callback. About the after build callbacks, they are called bottom to top. So once the recursive process is on the last element and it goes up, the after build are called. There are less than 10 uses in core. At least when I checked this, it was a year ago, I think. It didn't did this time, sorry. So it's unlikely that you may need it. It's worth to know that they exist, but it's not very used. And one example is removing an element after a file is checked. For example, let's say that you have some elements that, for whatever reason, they point to local files. Here you can check that the file really exists, and if it doesn't exist, you can remove the element from the form. How Drupal decides which handler to run? It's more simple than it seems. It's the same for the validation and the submit. If there is a button that it's pressed, that handler is used. If not, the form level validation or submit is used. So yeah, it's just the button or the form level handler. And talking about validation, let's see how validation works. It's where the Drupal, the form is checked, all the security and the values are checked. The token is checked, the one for the CSF, RF attacks it's checked. All the elements are validated bottom to top. This means that any validation callback that it's attached to the element is run. And at the end, the form validation is run, either the button validation or the validation attached to the form. That's it, like the general validation process. And this stage is able also to change the form or the form state for the next rebuild. So this means that obviously validation is able to enable the rebuilding process. So that means that the form will be rebuilt. So it's to enter into the rebuilding loop. This is the diagram. First, we check the token, and then we recursively check all the items on the form array until we reach the root element. In this case, we run the proper validation, and then go to the next stage. There is first validation errors. If there are errors, they are added to the render form. In this case, the submit handlers are skipped, because if there are errors in the form, there is no point to run any submit. And also the rebuilding is forbidden, because if there are errors, well, you should fix the errors. Then we have the submit stage, and what we do in the submit is the form is executed, running any actions related to the form, like creating a node, changing configuration, or doing any other custom action that you may need. This is done using the submit handlers, again, the handler related to the button or related to the form. The response is returned to the user if there is any. Usually a redirection or markup is delivered to the user. It also can change the form or form state for next rebuilds. So obviously it can enable the rebuilding process. This is the diagram for this stage. So if we should process the submit, submit. We run the form submit handlers. We clear the cache, because if there is some cache of the form and we have just submitted it, this is the final step of the form, so we don't need the cache anymore. And if there is a response, the response is returned. And the last stage that it's not always run is the rebuild. The rebuild is very important because, as I said before, it allows you to create or deal with complex forms, like multi-step forms, a form with dynamic elements, adding, removing elements, etc. It also deals with the AJAX calls that modify the form. And during the rebuild, as I said before, all the previous stages are run. The form is retrieve again, prepare, and build, in the sense of the recursively process that to build the form. It can also, and usually should, change the form and form state to allow form changes when it's rebuilt again. And this is the diagram. Once the rebuild is enabled, we retrieve the form. This is calling the build function again. We enable, well, this is automatically done by Drupal, the cache for post forms. The form is prepared. This is where the alter hooks are called, and then we check if we should cache or not, and then we build the form. That means to take the forms array and turn into a renderable array. And what about the cache and the persistence? This is well, the first thing you need to know is that it's named cache, but it's really persistence plus cache. This allows AJAX forms, multi-step, and dynamic elements, this cache and persistence together. Usually Drupal takes care of this, is auto-enabled. You may need to deal with it in special cases, but usually you don't need to. And exactly what is this cache or persistence? Well, the form and the form state are saved into storage. Form state is only some set of properties are saved. You can see them on the get cacheable array, but it's usually not important, because if you want to save some data, what you have to do is to use the form state CRUD operations. So you have a get operation, a set operation, and hash operation to see if some property is available. So really the important thing is the CRUD operation on the data you want to persist on different requests. That means that if you save something during a request and you send it to the user, when the user sends the form again, you will be able to check which value you save to the storage. And about the AJAX requests, They almost follow the same workflow. At the end of the request, there is a callback called the AJAX callback that returns whatever should be delivered to the user. They need cache and persistence, but as I said before, it's auto-enabled by Drupal core. And they can also return one or more AJAX commands that, if you don't know AJAX commands, they're very useful in when dealing with AJAX. Basically, there are some, let's say, prepared commands that you can send to the browser to remove some elements or add elements or doing different things. So they're very interesting when you deal with AJAX. And how to do the AJAX requests? Well, you have to define an element that triggers the AJAX request, like a button or something that when something happens on the form, the AJAX is triggered. Then the request goes to Drupal. The form passes through the previous stages, like build, validated, and execute. And during submit, usually some values are changed and the rebuild is enabled. So we enter into the rebuild loop, what allows us to modify the form and create those dynamic forms or whatever we need. It's important that the AJAX callback only returns changes part of the form, the whole form, or the AJAX commands, but it doesn't modify the form. It's intended to return the result, not to change the form. And once the response is delivered to the user, the JavaScript layer takes the response and processes it. For example, inserting the markup into the HTML. For example, when we are adding a new element or item into a multi-valued field, what we do here is to add that new item on the HTML. And something important about AJAX requests, because I have seen many people that struggle with the AJAX, and usually it's because they are doing something that they shouldn't. For example, don't change the form during the AJAX callback, because many people think that the AJAX callback is like a submit. So it's where you have to change the form according to what the AJAX request needs. And that's not the case, okay? And the AJAX callback, it only returns the results. It's not a submit. It's just result gatherer. Any changes should be done during the rebuilding, so in the build function or alters or something like that. And now let's see the complete Form API illustration. Here it is. It's well, a little bit complex, as you can see. This illustration, because this talk was the first featured on DrupalCon. This illustration is already, let me check, is already on the official Drupal documentation. So if you need to check it, you have it on the wiki. Okay, so you have a high resolution version. And I think all the information that I have said today, it's I think I was able to put that information on this illustration. So if you have to deal with complex forms, I think that this is something that you need to have it in mind, okay? And no. And it's important to know that there are some simplification. This is not the whole picture. The batch and programmed forms are not covered. They are more or less, they follow the same workflow, but they have some differences. There are some details that are not in this talk or in the image. for example, how the HTML IDs are handled. There are some edge cases that are not explained here, some security details, and more details. Because at the end, the Form API is something that, from my point of view, is very powerful, but at the same time, it's very complex. But the good thing is it hides or tries to hide the complexity. So a regular developer can use the forms with, I wouldn't say easily, but given that forms are a very complex thing and very sensible because they have very, security implications, it's good that you can use those forms with all the security that Drupal provides. And finally, the key points that you should keep, it's if you have to do big changes on a form, you need to use the build function on the alters forms. Well, the build function to create your form and the alters to make great changes on your form. The process and the after builds callbacks are only for adjustments or tweaks. Use the rebuilding loop for the dynamic forms in the way we have seen. Use the form state to store your own variables. Use the AJAX callback only to return response, not to change the form. And also, don't forget to check the Drupal example modulo, that if you don't know, I encourage you to have a look because it has a lot of examples and some of them are related to the Form API and they are very good. And that's all. Thank you. So, any questions?
Thanks. Yeah, I wonder whether there are some things to consider when you're building a custom form, like some common mistakes with which you can introduce some security issues.
Well, the good thing is that Drupal takes care of most of the part. So unless you are doing something very weird, you usually are covered. For example, when you access to the values of the form, you the easy way is to access to the validated and values that are already sanitized by Drupal. You still have access to the raw values, but you shouldn't do that. I mean, sometimes you have to do for whatever reason, but it's like you know that you are doing something strange. So I think there are no, or nothing comes into my mind on typical errors, apart from the one related to the AJAX, to using the AJAX callback as a submit instead of a result gatherer. Any other question?
Do you see a long life for Form API in Drupal core? Does it has mistakes or architecture? I mean, it's more than 10 years old, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good question, and probably you could do another talk or even above about this. I don't remember when it was added to Drupal. Someone told me that it was in Drupal 6. I'm not sure. The thing is that the Drupal API, the Form API, it hasn't changed since then. I mean, changed a little. It gets some orient programming tweaks when we enter in Drupal 8, but the workflow, it's almost the same. So, long life, well, for sure, because there are so many forms. I mean, it's the standard way to do forms in Drupal, so it will have a long life. In the same shape, there are some issues about turning it into a really object-oriented functionality, but those issues are not, they don't have many activity. I think that it will be probably very interesting, but the work to be done is hard. I don't know that sometimes I think that this will be one of the tasks that, for example, ChatGPT or the artificial intelligence can help on that, because at the end is not mechanical coding. I mean, something that you don't have to think a lot. It's just changing something that is structured into a object-oriented. But at the moment, there are no many activity. No, there is not much activity there. So I think that we'll stick with the Form API as it is for at least Drupal 11.
Okay.
Any other question? Then I guess, no, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your time. ¿Qué tal? Sí, okay.